Okay, so this is question 3 for the 2023 AP exam FRQs. This one looks like it appears to be an ecology question. So this one says, sand lances of the genus Ammodytes are small fish that function as keystone organisms in several coastal ecosystems. These sand lances are prey fish that support organisms at higher trophic levels. Scientists performed experiments to examine how sand lance populations are likely to be affected by the rising temperatures and CO2 levels associated with climate change. Sand lance embryos typically develop and mature into adult fish at low temperatures around 5 degrees and stable low CO2 levels at approximately 400 ATM. Over the course of 2 years, the scientists measured the survival rates of sand lance embryos allowed to develop and mature in a laboratory at 3 different temperatures, 5 degrees, 7 degrees, and 10 degrees, with the level of CO2 maintained at 400, 1,000, and 2,100 ATM for each temperature. Okay, so it looks like they are testing out the ability for these embryos to develop at different temperatures and different levels of CO2. They give you what they typically develop at, so which is 5 degrees and then 400 ATM. So it looks like we're increasing the temperature past what it should be to, kind of show what would happen with climate change. And then also we're increasing the amount of CO2 as well. So the first question is asking, describe the effect of increased biodiversity on the resilience of an ecosystem in a changing environment. So this one is frankly just a theory question that you guys should know. That's what they typically do with like the A of each of these questions. They're asking you the effect of increased biodiversity on resilience. This one is very straightforward. We know that if you increase biodiversity, you are going to increase resilience. They're not asking you to explain it, so you can say an increase in biodiversity. It's the same thing like an increase in genetic variation, right? An increase in biodiversity, meaning having multiple different types of species within the same area, is going to increase ecosystem resilience, right? If I have one type of organism in the environment, if anything were to happen, it would wipe out everything in that entire environment, right? However, if I have, a bunch of different organisms within the same environment, something happens like a shift in the food chain or maybe an invasive species, it's not going to knock out everything in that ecosystem. It might only knock out a little bit, and that's what ecosystem resilience is. It's their ability to come back from some sort of event. The more biodiversity you have, the more resilient you're going to be to the ecosystem. So increased biodiversity increases resilience. It's the same concept as increasing genetic diversity increases, resilience. It's the same kind of concept. Okay, so B says, justify the scientists selecting 5 degrees Celsius as the lowest temperature and 400 ATM as the lowest CO2 level in their study of sand lance embryo survival. Okay, so I mentioned this as I was going through and I didn't notice, but like I said, that the sand lances usually are at 5 degrees and 400 ATM. So we'll start with temperature. Since they typically develop at 5 degrees and we're doing temperatures 5, 7, and 10. 5 degrees is our lowest temperature that we're testing. Why are we not testing 3 degrees or 2 degrees? Why is 5 our lowest? Same thing for CO2 levels. They usually are at around 400 ATM. Here, 400 is our lowest, and then 1,000, and then 2,100. Why are we not testing what happens at, 200 ATM, for example? Now, the reason for that comes back to the question, right? What are we trying to study? Well, what we're trying to study is what is the effect of rising temperatures and CO2 levels, right? So what's associated with climate change is the increase in temperature and the increase in CO2, okay? So it would not make sense to look at what would happen if we decrease temperature and decrease CO2, because that's not happening. We're slowly getting warmer and we're slowly increasing the amount of CO2. So that is the reason why that's the starting value. There is no point to looking at what happens lower because we're trying to see the effect of climate change, which is the increase. So these conditions are going to be the basis, right? So they're going to be like our controls. So at 5 degrees and 400 ATM, how are they developing? Now, if we increase the temperature or increase the amount of CO2, how does that differ in relation to at 5 degrees and 400 ATM, which is the standard? Okay, so the way that I would say this is that for B, 5 degrees and 400 ATM are the basically normal conditions or the current conditions. So 5 degrees Celsius and 400 ATM. It's the same idea as what I was talking about in question 1, where you always need something to compare it to. You need a reference. If you see that they develop abnormally at 7 degrees, okay, but compared to what? How am I supposed to know that it's an abnormal development if I don't know what the normal development is under the normal conditions? So they are the standard conditions, and it allows you to compare the effect of climate change. Okay, so you're going to be looking at development at 7 degrees in comparison to 5 degrees, 10 degrees in comparison to 5 degrees. Okay, you're always going back to your standard, which in this case is 5 degrees and 400 ATM. Okay, so it allows you to compare effect of climate change, and then you could say also the effect of climate change from aka increase in temperature and increase in CO2. But I think this is more than enough. Okay, C says state a null hypothesis for the experiment. Now, students should know what a null hypothesis is going in. This is one of the things that you're going to have to learn when you're doing your graphs and your experimental design. Okay, this is something that they don't specifically teach you, but you should learn in your lab work and stuff like that. So like I was saying, dependent variable, independent variable, what's a control, what's a null hypothesis, certain things like that. You need to remember what those are. So in this case, a null hypothesis is always going to be that there is nothing happening, okay? And you either accept that or you reject it based on your data. The null hypothesis, null usually means nothing. So the null hypothesis is the statement that nothing is happening or there is no relation. Okay, it doesn't matter, if your data is telling you yes or no. The null hypothesis is always that there's no relation, and then you either accept that or you reject that, saying that there is a relation. So in this case, the null hypothesis is there is no effect on ability to mature, or we'll say on maturation of our sand lances. So you could say due to climate change, or when temp and CO2 concentration change. Okay, so that's your null hypothesis. If the data proves that there is a relationship, then you reject this and you say, yes, there is a relationship, and it's positive, it's negative, whatever it may be. Null hypothesis is always that nothing is happening. Okay. Now, finally, D says the scientists claim that a reduction in the population size of amodites, sand lances, will affect the stability of the entire coastal ecosystem. Provide reasoning to support scientists' claim. Okay, so if we start to lose the population of these sand lances, you have to support the fact that it's going to affect the stability of the entire coastal ecosystem. So I'm going to go back to this question and talk about the fact that sand lances function as a keystone organism, and they are prey fish that support organisms at higher trophic levels. So if I reduce the amount of sand lances, I'm basically reducing the amount of food that's available in that ecosystem. They're pretty much the bottom of the food chain, right? So if they are severely reduced, you're severely reducing the amount of food available in that ecosystem. Therefore, you're increasing competition. You're going to have a decrease in, those that are in higher trophic levels because there's just less food available. So D, you have to support this because you can say that sand lances are basically at the bottom of the food chain. Our sand lances provide food. So you can say it'll be negative. Food for higher trophic levels. Okay, so I think that should be good. So basically there's less food available. Okay, so that is it for question 3. This one was only worth 4 marks, so 1 for each of these. Okay, so that's question 3.